Good morning. This is the second part of our anecdote about Pearl Harbor. Our dad was in that battle, and if you're the future young and big and strong, there's some things there you could use. He was a chief petty officer when that battle broke out. He was stationed at the Navy Air Base there. He had a hangar and a crew, and he worked on these planes called PBYs. They're the ones you see in the movies that land in the water, have a crew of about a half dozen, and they fly for hundreds of miles. It was Sunday morning, and he had checked into the headquarters. He was about to go relieve stand watch. And he said he looked up at the sky, he saw the airplanes in the air, and they started dropping bombs, and he realized that they were under attack. So he couldn't relieve the watch. They just don't do that in the Navy when there's a battle on. So he went back to the headquarters. It was Sunday morning, and there were no bigwigs there, and he was a chief, so he ordered the crew that was there to break out all the windows and hide under the desks. He figured that the concussions from the bombs might send glass flying everywhere, and he wanted to protect everyone from that, which is the first thing to take away with you, the idea of individual effort. I've thought about that. I never would have thought to do that sort of thing. It just requires experience and personal effort. There was nothing left to do there, so he went back to the hangar where he works, which is the second thing that was helpful. Evidently in the Navy and the military, when there's a battle on or a disaster happening and you have no battle stations to go to, you go to work. Well, clever them. If there was a disaster going on here in Tucson, it would make sense for somebody to get up and go to the garage and start fixing cars and go to the bakery and start baking things. It makes all the difference in the world. You don't even have to ask anybody. And that's the second point to take away with you. The idea of doing things institutionally correct. There was nobody at the hangar, and so he hopped in a truck. They left the keys in the trucks there at that time. He went over to the barracks, and he found his crew, and he went back to the hangar, and they started getting airplanes ready to fly so the pilots could just hop in and take off. And then comes the third thing, the third part that's so important about our anecdote here. They're working away, and in comes the Navy ensign. He comes running in, huffing and puffing. He stops in the middle of the hangar, and he looks around. He looks at the crew, and they're all working, busy putting airplanes out. And he looks over at his chief, and his chief looks over at his ensign. And that's the third thing to take away from you. Pretend you're watching it as if you were in a movie. The chief takes care of the ensign, and the ensign, hopefully, will take care of his chief. That just doesn't happen in communist militaries. There is no courage in the KGB or any of those other countries, even if they don't rhyme. They don't do that sort of thing in many of the countries in Europe. They have too much of a peasant and property class society. They don't do any of that in the Central American countries. They only hire their relatives. For my generation, where they did away with the Air Force WAC and came in with the female fighter pilots, they all lowered their voice and talked tough. They don't have any of whatever happened in that one moment there. The same is true with the drug lords and the guys who are rioting around here the past few years. There's none of what happened there in them. But there is in you, correct? You are the future young and big and strong. You're the one with a quiet sense of self-assuredness and confidence, the stuff that courage comes from, and a positive sense of joy. You're the one that stands up. Two people bigger than you, defending people smaller than you. This is what the priests were talking about in the first part of our anecdote, wasn't it? To stand up for the priest and stand up against the pimp. To stand up against people who hustle, con, manipulate, and intimidate any people. Just because. We better leave it there. It'll all be up to you. whether we win or lose or not, when whatever happens in the next few years, it's all going to fall on your shoulders. So we're hoping for the best for you. Let's end this anecdote with something that Marine Corps Colonel said last year. They have a Pearl Harbor ceremony here in Tucson, and last year was a Marine Corps Colonel giving a speech. It was short, to the point, and it sort of made your back straighten up. He said, not paraphrasing very much at all, "To heck with them all," he says. "It's a privilege to be part of the United States. It's a privilege to be part of all of this." Don't tell that colonel we don't want him to get a big head, but I think he was right.